Now I'm going to list a few of the greatest powers in the world in the late 1690s, and I want you to tell me which one seems out of place. Is it A, Britain, B, France, or C, Sweden? Yeah, one of these things is not like the others. It may be hard to believe, but in the late 1600s, Sweden was one of the great powers of Europe, and it was feared by a majority of the continent. Their military was forced to make up for a large number disadvantage by perfecting linear tactics and being up to date with the latest military technology. They had taken multiple territories from their neighbors in wars and skirmishes throughout the century, but their expansion had come at a cost. They had taken territories from both Denmark, Norway, and Poland, Lithuania, which had made enemies of them both. But Sweden's strong king and even stronger military kept the hounds at bay. That was until Sweden's monarch, Charles XI, died and left his kingdom to his 15-year-old son, who was also named Charles. Enter Peter the Great of Russia. He was a very Europe-focused ruler and dreamed of expanding his empire to the west, which they didn't really have very much influence in at the time. But to do this, he would need to get a port in the Baltics to open up trade with the great powers of the day. He saw the coronation of the boy King Charles XII as the perfect opportunity to get that Baltic port, and he created a secret military pact with Denmark, Norway, and Poland, Lithuania, with the intent to take that Baltic port he wanted so badly from the Swedish. Now, Peter the Great was still in a war with the Ottoman Empire, and so wanted to wait until the war was finished to start another war, but his allies decided to go ahead with the plan anyway and launched an attack against Sweden. Sweden did have a powerful military, but they were overextended, had no allies that would come to their aid, and were outnumbered almost 4-1. The only thing that could save them was, I don't know, if they had some sort of once-in-a-century military prodigal genius or something like that. But they don't have that. It's not going to be an issue. The Polish attacked the city of Riga, but were repelled in a decisive Swedish victory. Denmark tried to attack some Swedish territory they bordered, but were unsuccessful. Charles XII responded to this by laying siege to and capturing the Danish capital of Copenhagen. This caught them completely off guard, and they surrendered immediately. The anti-Swedish coalition was now a duo. The Russians, who had now made peace with the Ottomans, sent an army towards the city of Narva and prepared for a siege. Charles XII, who was the king of Sweden at the time, moved his forces to Narva and prepared for a battle. The Battle of Narva is often considered Charles XII's magnum opus. He was outnumbered 4-1 and was going against an entrenched enemy. Everyone told him that there was no way he could win this battle, but Charles just said, "Fuck you," and attacked. The reason this battle was such a great victory for the Swedish was because Charles XII strategically waited for the pouring snow to turn in their favor. The Russians were blinded, and the Swedish immediately moved into their lines, picking them off one by one until the Russians were forced into a full retreat. With thousands of their men dead, the Russians were forced to go on the defensive and wait for the Swedish to make their next move. This move would come the next year when Charles launched an invasion of Poland and Lithuania, where he capitulated them and installed a puppet king on the throne. Even with the amazing Swedish gains, the war was looking like it could drag on for years, and Charles was not having it. He decided that the only way to defeat the Russian beast was to stab it in the heart. He was going for Moscow. He marched 40,000 men across Russia with the goal of ending the war once and for all. Charles brought very little supplies with him. He had planned on living off the land for food. Peter realized this and destroyed all of the land surrounding Charles's army, turning it into a barren wasteland. When the winter struck, over half his army was destroyed in what would be known as the Great Frost. It was called that for the fact that it was the coldest winter in over 500 years. Charles moved an army into Ukraine to meet up with a local leader who had promised him over 30,000 men to help fight Peter. When he got there, only around 1,500 men were waiting to reinforce him. He moved south, where he was attacked by a 48,000-strong army led by Peter. Charles' army was routed, and he lost 6,000 of his 25,000 men. This massive defeat forced Charles to flee to the Ottoman Empire, who was glad to harbor Russian enemies. During this time, the Russians took all of the Baltics from Charles and started pushing into Swedish territory for the first time in years. It had been years at this point since Sweden knocked the original partners from out of the war, but they were ready for round two. They rejoined the war and took territory from Sweden quickly. It was looking bad for Sweden, but they weren't out of the game yet. They still had Charles XII, and he was known for turning near impossible situations into wins. He made an attempt to capture the strategic fort of Fredrikstad, but failed. Years later, he tried to take the fort again, but was killed in a mind-blowing musket shot to the brain. After a few more years of war under the new queen, the Swedish made peace with the Allies and were forced to give up this territory. This war is commonly seen as the end of an empire and the birth of another. If Russia had lost this war, it's likely that they would be nowhere near as powerful as they were now, if they even existed at all. If Sweden had pulled a victory in this war, it's completely possible that they would still be a world power today, but this isn't as likely. That's about it. Goodbye.